For several hours now, a young man had been wandering through the woods. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, yet he couldn't find his way out. He knew the forest around Springville, Tennessee, like the back of his hand, or so he thought. How he'd gotten lost, even he couldn't figure out. Though he lived in the city, the pull of nature was strong, and weekends often found him hiking the trails. His name was Ethan. He was a decent guy, kind, helpful, always ready to lend a hand. Ethan had a passion: fishing. This weekend, he'd set out for Cedar Lake, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost his bearings. Wandering aimlessly, he was about ready to bed down on a soft patch of moss when he stumbled into a clearing. There, a lake shimmered, not the one he'd aimed for, he was sure of it. Cedar Lake was long and narrow, while this one was round, like a perfect circle. Strangest of all, a cabin stood near the shore with a wooden boardwalk stretching from it right into the water. "Well, I'll be," Ethan muttered. "I've been coming here for years and never seen this place. Maybe someone's home. I could ask to crash for the night." He headed straight for the cabin. "Hello," he called, knocking. "Anyone there? Don't mean to intrude. I got a bit turned around. Mind letting me stay?" No answer came, just silence. Ethan stepped into the dim entryway. Maybe it's a hunting cabin, he reasoned. It's off-season now, so it's empty. Well, I'm not here to break anything. If the owners show up, I'll explain. Inside, he shrugged off his backpack and jacket, then lit the old wood stove. Soon, the place felt warm and cozy. After a simple dinner from his pack, he decided to check out the surroundings. Stepping onto the porch, he took in the view. The boardwalk wound from the cabin to the lake, and the scene was downright enchanting. Suddenly, he felt an urge to swim. The water looked murky but was surprisingly warm. Why not, he thought, peeling off his clothes and diving into the greenish depths. After a good swim, he sat on the dock, dangling his feet. Something brushed his foot, barely noticeable. Probably just weeds, he figured. Then, something grazed his other leg, firm, like a hand. Startled, he yanked it back. This place must be teeming with fish. They're fearless. I've got to get up early and cast a line, he decided. Heading back inside, he found the cabin pitch black. He brewed some tea, settled by the window, and sipped a hot drink while staring into the dark woods. The stillness outside was profound and almost lulled him to sleep. Finishing his tea in one gulp, he crawled into bed. The quiet wrapped around him like a blanket. Ethan woke to faint singing. At first, he couldn't place it, lying still and straining to hear. High, girlish voices floated through the air. The words were too soft to catch, just a haunting tune. Curious, he slipped out of bed and peered through the window. Under the full moon, the lake glowed faintly. On the shore, four young women in long white dresses moved in a slow, graceful dance with their hair loose and flowing. They circled in perfect sync, and Ethan watched, mesmerized. How long he stood there, he couldn't say, until a noise behind him snapped him out of it. Turning, he found himself face to face with a blonde girl in a matching white dress. A soft light seemed to radiate from her, and her glowing white eyes locked onto his. His hair stood on end. A jolt shot through him, and he bolted for the door. Flinging it open, he tripped over something and tumbled off the porch, sprawling onto the grass. Heart pounding, he lay face down, too scared to look up. Then he saw them, 4 pairs of bare feet surrounding him. Rolling over, he lifted his gaze. 8 eerie, glowing eyes stared down from pale faces bending toward him. Suddenly, the girls burst into shrill laughter and began circling him. Their steps quickened like some twisted ring around the rosy. The sound grew louder and wilder until it swallowed everything, and Ethan's world went black. He came to at dawn, sprawled on the dewy lawn outside the cabin. Blinking, Ethan tried to piece together what had happened, but his mind was foggy. Shaking it off, he stumbled inside and brewed a strong cup of coffee. As the caffeine kicked in, fragments of the night crept back, those glowing eyes and that laughter, but it felt too unreal to believe. Grabbing his gear, he shut the door tight and set off, determined to get home. He followed the faint trail that had led him here and replayed the madness in his head. Did it happen, or was I just beat? He wondered, kicking up fallen leaves along Old Mill Road. Maybe I imagined it. Exhaustion can mess with you. Then he glanced up. There, in the clearing, stood the cabin again with its lake and all, despite his walking away from it for hours. What in tarnation, he yelled. Frustration boiled over. He'd been trekking through Cherokee National Forest long enough to be starving and fed up. "Fine, whatever," he muttered. It was Sunday, still a day left to salvage this trip. Back inside, he ditched his jacket, grabbed his fishing rod, and marched to the lake. The fish were biting like crazy, and soon he had a pot of chowder simmering. Savoring each spoonful, he silently thanked whoever stocked this place with canned goods. The day wasn't a total bust after all. Maybe he'd just roll with it, fish, eat, and figure out the rest later. The chowder was top-notch, and Ethan couldn't help but appreciate the hunters who left behind staples like beans and rice in these backwoods retreats. As evening settled over the forest, the light faded fast. He brewed another cup of coffee, dragged a chair onto the porch, and plopped down, soaking in the peaceful dusk. The lake stretched out before him, calm and quiet. He was about to call it a night when ripples broke the surface. Eyes locked on the water, he watched as a thin mist drifted over the dark green expanse. The moon slid out from behind clouds and painted the lake with a silvery sheen. The ripples widened and lapped gently against the dock. Then, one by one, 4 heads emerged from the water. They glided closer and rose until they stepped fully onto the boardwalk, those same girls in white dresses from the night before. They moved onto the shore and began their eerie chant again. This time, outside, Ethan strained to catch the words. He couldn't make out much, but it seemed they were calling for a sister, someone they'd waited for and longed to join. A rustle came from behind. Whipping around, he saw another girl in the doorway. Her figure was faint, like she was trapped by an invisible wall. Her white dress matched theirs. Her face was pale and pleading. Ethan froze. The hairs on his neck prickled as the night took on a strange, otherworldly weight. "Who are you?" Ethan whispered. "A prisoner of this cabin," she replied. Her voice was barely audible. "And those girls out there? My sisters. They've been calling me for years and waiting, but I can't go to them, though it's all I want. What's holding you back? There's no one here. Go!" "I can't," she said, and a soft sob escaped her. Ethan's chest tightened with pity. He felt the despair radiating from her. "Tell me what happened. Why are you stuck here while they're out there? Why can't you be together?" Her voice, fragile as a distant bell, began to weave a tale. Long ago, near this spot off Route 64, there was a little town called Pine Hollow. Life was good, cattle in the yards, weddings, funerals. At the edge of town stood a house. A family lived there, a mom, a dad, and 5 daughters. We were happy and tight-knit. Then the war came, World War II. Dad got drafted and left for Europe. Mom kept us going. Times got hard and lean. That's when the town's deputy, a rotten sort who dodged the draft with cash, started sniffing around. He'd come by and pester Mom, trying to force her into things no decent woman should face. "Give in, or I'll see your kids starve and report you for hoarding rations," he'd shout. She'd chase him off, but he kept coming. His shadow darkened our doorstep. "How dare you, with my husband fighting overseas?" Mom yelled once and smacked him with a broom. That deputy nursed a grudge deep. Soon after, word came, Dad was gone, killed in France. Mom collapsed under the grief and didn't last long after that. We girls were left alone in Pine Hollow. We managed and kept to ourselves, but that deputy wouldn't let up. His old wound festered, and he'd swing by, promising us the world if one of us married him. I was the oldest, and I remembered how he'd harassed Mom. One day, I'd had enough of his slimy talk and slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed. My sisters turned and saw his stunned look, red cheeks swelling, and burst out laughing, loud and free. He stormed off, humiliated. That night, a knock came. I opened the door to half the town. The deputy stood at the front and hollered, "There's your witch. Her and her sisters, hexing us all and bringing ruin on Pine Hollow." I heard him chanting spells myself. The crowd roared and was out for blood. We tried to reason, but they were past listening. The war had hit everyone. Folks were hungry, and livestock were dying off. They blamed us for every misfortune. "Leave town, or we'll burn you out," they screamed. We had no choice. We packed what we could carry and fled into the woods off Highway 27. Eventually, we stumbled on this cabin and figured we'd lay low to ride it out. But that deputy wasn't done. Running us out of Pine Hollow wasn't enough. We were scraping by out here, foraging and surviving. He got wind of it and spun a yarn to some local roughnecks, outlaws holed up near Cumberland Gap. He told them we were living high and stashing gold in a chest. He said they could take it all, as long as he got his revenge. One night, their boots hit the porch. That quiet song we sang turned to chaos. They tore through the cabin and hunted treasure that wasn't there. Furious, they cursed us for hiding. We didn't say a word, just ran. Out the door and down to the lake we went. Better death than shame, we cried and plunged into the icy water. It swallowed us fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, gone under. I stayed back and urged them on, but before I could jump, those men grabbed me and dragged me inside. I fought and broke free, then dove into the cellar and bolted the trapdoor. They pounded on it. Axes swung, but they couldn't break through. Either their tools were dull or their arms gave out. Then I heard him, the deputy, charging in from the woods off Miller's trail. He yelled down at me, "Open up, or you're done. It's my way or nothing." I kept quiet. He went berserk and grabbed a hammer and nails, then sealed the trapdoor shut. "If I can't have you, no one will," he snarled and left me to rot. Trapped down there, I couldn't get out. One day, 2, 3, I faded away alone. That deputy? On his way back to Pine Hollow, he got lost in a storm off Route 64. Wind kicked up, and a dead tree pinned him, finishing him off. Folks forgot the whole ugly mess and buried it with time. But my sisters linger. Every night, they rise from the lake and call me to join them, to leave this world together. I can't. My body's still down in that cellar and chains my soul here. Blood and that awful death bind us. They won't go without me, and I can't reach them, she said. Tears fell. Can anyone help? I'm not the only one who hikes these woods. Plenty roam Cherokee Forest, but you're the only one who found this cabin and came back after the first scare. Ethan frowned and thought, scared? I passed out cold when those glowing eyes hit me, then spent half the next day running in circles. He chuckled grimly. No escaping this place. I'd hightail it if I could, he said aloud, but the path keeps dragging me back. Maybe if I help you, I'll find my way out. How, though? Take my body from the cellar. Bring it to my sisters. I can't take it anymore, blamed for nothing and killed so cruelly. Isn't my suffering done? She wept again, then faded. Ethan squared his shoulders and grabbed a flashlight from his pack, then headed inside to face the dark. He found a crowbar in the shed and pried at the nails sealing the cellar door. It didn't take long. His hands knew their work. The trapdoor creaked open, and a damp, musty stench hit him hard. Shining the light down, he saw rickety stairs. Step by step, he descended and crouched low, sweeping the beam around. In a corner, something white caught his eye. Crawling closer, he found it, a body, shriveled like a husk. The dress, once white, was tattered to threads. Her hands rested on her knees. Her head bowed as if resigned to her fate. Gently, Ethan lifted her and carried her up and out to the porch. The moon blazed bright and lit the clearing. Ahead, 4 ghostly figures stood. Their arms were outstretched, beckoning. Holding their sister, he walked toward them. They drifted to the lake and waved him on. He followed to where the dock met the water. The 4 slipped beneath the surface and vanished. Kneeling, Ethan laid her body on the still lake. It sank slowly and left no ripples until the black depths claimed her. He watched until she was gone. Silence fell, no breeze, no birds, just the moon glowing over the scene. Leaning over the water, he stared at his reflection. A faint whisper brushed his ear, "Thank you." The air felt lighter. The night seemed less heavy, as if something had finally let go. Years later, Ethan tried to find that cabin again and scoured the woods off Highway 27, but it was gone. The lake and all were like they never existed. From that day on, though, his luck turned unreal. Wherever he fished, Cedar Lake, the Tennessee River, anywhere, his haul was legendary. Guys at the bait shop in Springville would gawk and ask, "How's every big bass in the state end up on your line?" He'd just grin and shrug, keeping the story to himself. That night by the lake had changed something, though he'd never tell a soul about the sisters or the cabin. Standing on the dock, he'd freed them, and maybe himself too. The forest kept its secrets, and he was fine with that. The moon still shone. The fish still bit, and life rolled on, a little quieter, a little stranger, but good. It was a scorching July morning when I loaded up my weathered Ford Mustang with everything I owned and peeled out onto the cracked asphalt. I was buzzing with raw excitement to kick off my freshman year at Jefferson State University, though the daunting 8-hour trek to campus twisted my stomach into knots. My folks back in Springfield had begged to ride along with their voices thick with worry, but I shut that down fast. I was 18, a grown man ready to carve out my independence in this wild and unforgiving world. The first stretch of the journey flew by like a dream. I cranked up my go-to playlists with grunge and metal screaming through the speakers and tore through a bag of beef jerky and gas station candy, feeling invincible behind the wheel of my rust-streaked ride. About 5 hours in, deep into the lonely stretches of Interstate 64, I glanced at the fuel gauge and saw the needle flirting with empty. My GPS flickered and promised a gas station 10 miles ahead off exit 13, so I planned to pull over there to refill the tank and grab a bitter black coffee to keep my edge. When I veered off the interstate, a sour and creeping unease slithered up my spine. The exit spat me onto a desolate two-lane road called Route 17, flanked by towering pines and tangled underbrush that seemed to swallow the sunlight whole. No houses or cars or even a road sign appeared in sight, just a decaying gas station hunched alone in a weed-choked clearing with its faded sign creaking in the wind, Buck's Fuel Stop. I hesitated with my foot hovering over the brake, but the fuel light pulsed an angry red, and the next stop was 40 miles out. Swallowing hard, I rolled up to a pump as the gravel crunched under my tires like brittle bones. At first, the place looked like a ghost town with dark windows and rusted pumps while a stale breeze carried the faint stench of gasoline and rot. Then I spotted it, a rusty Chevy truck lurking around the side with its dented hood smeared with what might have been mud or perhaps something worse. Stepping out to fill up, the air felt thick and oppressive, and the hairs on my neck prickled as if invisible eyes were boring into me from the shadows of the trees. I tried to laugh it off and blamed the jitters on too many hours staring at the road, but the silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of the pump and a distant, eerie crow's call. I had just snapped the gas cap back on when heavy footsteps thudded behind me, slow and deliberate. I spun around with my heart lurching and locked eyes with a grizzled older man limping my way. He was gaunt and towered over me with a wild mane of silver hair matted with grime and a beard that looked like it had been clawed at by time itself. His flannel shirt hung in tatters, stained with dark splotches, and his sunken eyes gleamed with something unhinged. "You shouldn't be out here by yourself, kid," he growled as his voice rumbled low and echoed off the trees. I froze with my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth while my pulse hammered in my ears. He shuffled closer and reeked of sweat and something metallic as his gaze darted to the woods like he expected something to lunge out. "These back roads ain't safe, especially once night falls. Watch yourself, you hear? Things move out there, things that don't take kindly to strangers," he warned. I managed a jerky nod with my throat dry as sandpaper. "Thanks for the heads up," I muttered. He stared at me unblinking, and his cracked lips twitched into a grim half-smile. "Rough types roam these parts, hungry types. They hunt young blood like you, lost souls passing through. Been too many disappearances around here lately. You do well to hightail it back to the interstate and don't stop till you hit civilization or what's left of it," he added ominously. With that chilling prophecy, he turned and hobbled back toward the shack as his shadow stretched long and twisted across the ground. I dove into my car, slammed the door, and peeled out so fast the tires kicked up a storm of dust and gravel. Merging back onto Interstate 64, I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened and tried to shake the dread coiling in my chest. He was probably just some backwoods nutcase spinning yarns to spook me, I reasoned with myself, but the memory of his wild eyes and the oppressive stillness of that place clung to me like damp rot. I cruised another hour or so while the sun sank low and painted the sky in streaks of blood red and bruising purple. Shadows clawed longer across the asphalt, and the highway stretched empty ahead, save for the occasional semi-rumbling past. I was starting to unclench and let the music drown out my unease when I caught a battered Jeep Cherokee in my rearview roaring up fast, too fast. At first, I figured they would blow by as just some impatient rednecks, but as it loomed closer, I saw 3 or 4 figures inside with hulking and jagged silhouettes pointing at my Mustang with fevered gestures. My heart slammed against my ribs as the Jeep glued itself to my bumper with its headlights glaring like a predator's eyes in the dusk. I punched the gas and coaxed every ounce of power from my old ride while the engine roared in protest, but the Jeep matched me relentlessly with its grille practically kissing my tail. Panic clawed up my throat. This wasn't road rage, they were hunting me. That old man's warning screamed in my skull with every word dripping with fresh and horrifying weight. I scanned the horizon for an exit or a rest stop or anything, but the road unfurled like a black ribbon into nowhere. Suddenly, the Jeep swerved into the left lane and pulled level with me as its chipped paint and cracked windshield glinted in the fading light. I stole a glance and wished I hadn't. 4 men with faces carved from menace, shaved heads, jagged tattoos snaking up their necks, and eyes hollow and feral. The passenger hung out the window with his grin a slash of yellow teeth, waving a pistol that caught the last rays of sun. He bellowed something guttural that got lost in the howl of wind and engines, but the intent was clear. They wanted me dead or worse. My blood turned to ice as my mind became a frantic slideshow of every gruesome fate they might have planned: robbery, torture, or some sick game played out in the woods where no one would hear me scream. Adrenaline surged, primal and electric, and I made a desperate call. As the Jeep veered hard to ram me off the road with its tires screeching with intent, I slammed the brakes with both feet. The sudden drop threw them off. Their rig shot past and fishtailed wildly as the driver wrestled the wheel. I cranked my steering hard and skidded across the grassy median in a spray of dirt, then cut back into the oncoming lanes. Horns blared and headlights flared as I swerved through traffic while my rear view showed the Jeep spinning in a chaotic U-turn with its frame shuddering like a rabid beast. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel while sweat stung my eyes, but I floored it and wove through cars with the Mustang's engine screaming for mercy. Every glance in the mirror showed the Jeep clawing its way back, but inch by inch, they fell behind and got swallowed by the dusk and distance. After what felt like an eternity, probably 20 minutes of pure terror, they vanished from sight. Still, I didn't dare slow down or breathe and drove like a man possessed, half expecting their headlights to flare up again like a nightmare that wouldn't quit. It wasn't until I hit the glowing signs for Jefferson City, the college town, that I let my lungs unlock. I took exit 9 and rolled onto campus in a haze, trembling like a leaf in a storm with my shirt soaked with cold sweat. Parking in the dorm lot under the flicker of sodium lights, the full weight of it crashed over me, hours of dread, a brush with something evil, and the miracle of escape. I crumpled and sobbed uncontrollably, torn between bone-deep fear, shaky relief, and the surreal shock of still being alive. To this day, I have no answers about those men, who they were, or why they picked me. A roving gang? Sadistic drifters? Something darker tied to the whispered vanishings that old man hinted at? I called the Jefferson County Sheriff with my voice cracking as I spilled the story, but with no plates or clear faces. It was just another dead-end report filed away. That day carved itself into me and left scars that didn't fade. For months, I woke gasping from nightmares about those hollow eyes, that gun, and the endless road, plagued by panic attacks that hit like thunderclaps. I turned paranoid and jumped at shadows, always scanning for that Jeep in every parking lot and every stretch of highway. It took years of therapy and countless sessions peeling back the trauma to feel halfway safe again. I'm telling this now as a warning and a raw plea to anyone, especially kids like me, young and alone on the open road. The world has teeth, and they're sharpest where you least expect them. Trust that gut twitch, keep your eyes peeled, and have a damn plan when it all goes to hell. I got lucky and cheated whatever fate they had in store, but others might not. Sometimes I lie awake replaying it. What if I had skipped Buck's fuel stop or blown off that old man's cryptic words or locked up when they struck? There's no way to know. All I have is the cold, hard truth that I survived and the gnawing fear that out there, somewhere, they're still hunting. It had been about 6 months since I'd started working as a food delivery driver for Benny's Burger Joint in Springfield, Illinois. The pay wasn't anything to write home about, but it kept the lights on and the fridge stocked while I chipped away at my business degree at Lincoln Community College. That Friday night kicked off like any other shift, nothing special, just the usual grind. I'd already dropped off a handful of orders around town, greasy bags of burgers and fries handed over to tired office workers and rowdy college kids, without so much as a hiccup. Then, around 10 o'clock, my phone pinged with a new order. It was for a place way out in the boonies, a solid 20-minute drive from the city limits along Route 55. I raised an eyebrow at the distance. Deliveries that far out weren't common, but the tip was a generous $15, so I shrugged and thought, why the hell not? I plugged the address, 14 Old Hollow Road, into my GPS and hit the gas. The city lights of Springfield faded in my rearview mirror as I cruised past the last gas station on the edge of town, a flickering Shell sign buzzing in the dark. The roads turned twisty and tight, asphalt giving way to cracked pavement and gravel. Houses became scarce, replaced by endless stretches of cornfields and dense patches of oak trees swaying in the chilly March breeze. A knot started tightening in my gut. Who orders a double cheeseburger combo with extra pickles from a joint like Benny's when they're living this far out in the middle of nowhere? After what felt like forever, my GPS chimed. "You have arrived at your destination." I slowed my beat-up Ford Focus and pulled up to a weathered farmhouse set a good 50 yards back from the road. The place was pitch black, save for a lone porch light that flickered like a dying firefly. It looked like something straight out of a horror flick: sagging roof, peeling white paint, and a couple of windows boarded up with splintered plywood. I sat there in my car for a minute, engine idling, my fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to peel out and head back to civilization, but $20 was $20, and I couldn't afford a 1-star review dragging down my rating. So, I sucked it up, grabbed the warm paper bag, and stepped out into the night. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I made my way up the overgrown path. Up close, the house looked even worse. The wooden steps creaked ominously under my weight, and the air smelled faintly of damp rot and something metallic I couldn't place. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached the front door, a faded red thing with a cracked glass panel. I hesitated, then pressed the doorbell, a rusty old buzzer that let out a weak, pitiful whine. Silence. I shifted my weight, ready to ditch the food and bolt, when I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps thudding from somewhere inside. The door creaked open, and a tall figure loomed in the shadows. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, with greasy gray hair hanging in clumps over his forehead. His eyes were wide and glassy, like he hadn't slept in days. "Hey, evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Got a delivery from Benny's for this address. Double cheeseburger combo, extra pickles." The guy didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his head tilted slightly, like he was sizing me up. The silence stretched on for way too long, and I felt sweat prickling under my jacket despite the cool night air. Then, out of nowhere, his lips split into a grin, a big, crooked thing that showed off yellowed teeth. "Oh, yes, he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper on gravel. "Come on in. Bring it upstairs. They're all waiting." My stomach dropped. Every red flag in my brain lit up like a 4th of July fireworks show. I can just leave it here on the porch if that's easier," I said, my voice cracking a little as I took a step back. "No," he barked, his grin vanishing as fast as it had appeared. His hand shot out, bony fingers wrapping around my wrist. "You need to bring it up. 3rd floor. Now." Panic surged through me. I yanked my arm free, nearly dropping the bag in the process, and stumbled backward down the steps. "Look, man, I'm sorry, but company policy, I can't go inside customers' houses. I'll just leave it here, okay?" I set the food down on the porch and kept backing away, my eyes locked on him. But before I could turn, he lunged forward, blocking my path to the car. "You're not leaving," he growled, his voice low and menacing. In the faint glow of the porch light, his eyes looked pitch black, like 2 empty holes boring into me. I don't know where the guts came from, maybe it was pure adrenaline, but I shoved him hard, my palms slamming into his chest. He staggered back with a grunt, and I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I sprinted for my car, my sneakers slipping on the gravel as my shaky hands fumbled for my keys. Behind me, I heard him shouting, his voice raw and furious, followed by the heavy thud of boots chasing after me. I flung the driver's door open and dove inside, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, "Come on, you piece of junk," then roared to life. I glanced up just as he reached my window, his fist pounding on the glass so hard I thought it'd shatter. His face was twisted into something feral, spit flying from his mouth as he yelled words I couldn't make out. I floored the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, tires spinning and kicking up a cloud of dust and rocks. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of 2 more figures, tall, shadowy guys, bursting out of the house and running after me. They chased me for maybe 10 seconds before slowing to a stop, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkness. But what stuck with me most was the old woman. She'd appeared on the porch at some point, standing there under that flickering light with that same creepy grin plastered on her face. She raised a hand and waved at me, slow and deliberate, like she was saying, "See you soon." I tore down that dirt road, old hollow road, my own personal nightmare, going 60, maybe 70 miles an hour, not daring to ease up until I hit the smooth pavement of Route 55. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel, and my breath came in ragged gasps. What the hell had just happened? Was that some kind of setup? Were they planning to rob me, kidnap me, or something way worse? My mind raced with a million questions, none of them with answers that made me feel any better. By the time I screeched into the parking lot of Benny's burger joint, I was a mess, sweat-soaked, pale as a ghost, and still hyperventilating. I burst through the back door into the kitchen, where my manager, Jake, was wiping down the grill. He took one look at me and dropped the rag. "Jesus, Ethan, what happened? You look like you've seen a damn banshee." I tried to get the story out between gulps of air. This delivery, out on Old Hollow Road, some crazy guy tried to drag me inside, chased me to my car. There were others. My words tumbled over each other, half coherent, but Jake got the gist. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911 right there, his face grim as he handed me a bottle of water and told me to sit down. The cops showed up 15 minutes later, 2 officers in crisp Springfield PD uniforms. I gave them my statement, going over every detail I could remember: the farmhouse, the guy's wild eyes, the 2 men chasing me, the old woman waving. They scribbled it all down, nodding like they'd heard weirder, and promised to check it out. I stayed at Benny's until closing, too freaked out to drive home alone, sipping lukewarm coffee while Jake locked up. The next day, Jake called me with an update. The police had gone out to 14 Old Hollow Road that night. The farmhouse was there, all right, but it was empty, completely abandoned. No furniture, no lights, no sign of anyone living there. The cops said it looked like nobody had set foot in the place for years. The windows were still boarded up, the porch sagging, and the only tracks they found in the gravel were mine from when I had peeled out. No greasy-haired guy, no shadowy figures, no creepy old lady. Nothing. They ran the address through their system, but it didn't match any recent orders or reports. The whole thing was a dead end. I quit my job at Benny's the next morning. No amount of tips was worth that kind of terror. I picked up a gig bussing tables at a diner on Main Street instead. Less driving, more daylight, safer vibes. But that night still haunts me. I wake up some mornings, heart racing, dreaming about that flickering porch light and those black, empty eyes. Was it a prank? Some sick game played by bored weirdos? Or did I dodge something truly evil out there on Old Hollow Road? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I thought about digging deeper, tracking down property records or asking around, but every time I start, that woman's wave flashes in my mind, and I freeze. I told the cops what I could, but what's the point of pushing it? "Hey, officer, I saw a creepy dude while dropping off a burger." They'd laugh me out of the station, or worse, I'd stir up something I can't handle. So, I've kept it bottled up, trying to move on, pretending it's just a bad memory I can shake off. But deep down, I know I got lucky. Others might not. If you're ever out there delivering late at night, whether it's burgers, pizza, or whatever, and you pull up to some rundown shack that feels wrong, listen to that little voice in your head. Trust your gut. It might just save your life.